Firing your best member is the dumbest thing a band can do, and these 10 bands did it anyway. The voice, the writer, the soul of the whole operation, gone. Some got greedy, some got jealous, some just got stupid. The bands survived. The magic didn't. Here's a question. What's the worst thing that ever happened to Ozzy Osbourne? Getting fired from Black Sabbath on April 27th, 1979, blindsided by his own bandmates for substance abuse while the entire band was using heavily. Tony Iommi has admitted it. The hypocrisy was staggering. But here's the twist. It was also the best thing that ever happened to him. Ozzy launched a solo career that eclipsed Sabbath commercially, found Randy Rhoads, one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived, and eventually became a global household name far beyond music. Sabbath carried on with Ronnie James Dio and made genuinely great records, but in the mainstream imagination, Ozzy was black. Sabbath, and they just cut him loose. They didn't end his career, they accidentally launched the second, bigger one, which brings us to another frontman who got shown the door. Except, nobody can agree on who opened it. Nobody, not Roth, not Eddie, not anyone in that room, has ever told the same story twice about what happened in 1985. Roth says he walked. Eddie suggested mutual collapse over a movie project. The band says they fired him. The truth is probably all three at once. What everyone agrees on, the most electric frontman in rock was gone, replaced by Sammy Hagar, and 5150 went straight to number 1.
I don't talk about Van Halen, not once, on my stage during my show, and I haven't on this tour. I think we're on our 50th gig.
On paper, a win. In reality, Van Halen traded a singular, dangerous personality for radio-friendly polish. The smirk, the acrobatics, the sense that something could go wrong at any second. All gone. Eddie's death in 2020 closed the door on any real answer. Permanently. The mystery stays unsolved. What isn't a mystery is what happens when a band decides its visionary writer is the problem. Roger Waters found that out the hard way.
Well, I've always had a deep respect and mean that most sincerely.
Roger Waters didn't just leave Pink Floyd, he tried to detonate it on the way out. He resigned in 1985, declared the band legally and creatively dead, then immediately sued to stop Gilmour and Mason from using the name. He lost. What makes this story combustible is that Waters had a point. He was Pink Floyd's creative engine at their peak. The Wall, Animals, The Final Cut, the fury, the politics, the darkness that made them genuinely important, rather than merely impressive. Without him, Gilmour and Mason made polished records that sold millions. But the teeth were gone. Post-Waters. Floyd sounds like a beautiful imitation of itself. All the texture, none of the bite. Waters built something extraordinary, burned the bridge trying to keep others off it, and lost anyway. Steve Perry never fought that hard. He was just quietly erased.
Just a city boy, born and raised right here in Houston.
Every night, Journey takes the stage. They perform for a voice that isn't there. Steve Perry wasn't fired with a phone call. He was squeezed out slowly. Health issues used as a lever until he was replaced without any clean agreement or proper ending. Because Perry's voice wasn't just a selling point. It was the entire emotional architecture of the band. Don't Stop Believin' Faithfully. Open Arms. These songs live in cultural memory because of what that voice does to people. The way it makes a 20,000 seat arena feel like a private confession. Every replacement Journey has hired has been technically capable and essentially a tribute act performing someone else's legacy. Perry's intimacy at stadium scale has never been reproduced. No amount of searching has found a substitute. Journey tours, tickets sell, but every audience is really there to hear a ghost.
Through space and time, always another
At least his exit was slow. Steven Adler's wasn't.
look at the hate we're breeding. Look at the fear we're feeding.
Time equals, quote, 1.5 seconds, quote, slash, greater than, you can hire a better drummer. But you cannot hire a better feel. Steven Adler was the pulse of appetite for destruction. Loose, swinging, slightly behind the beat in ways that made Welcome to the Jungle feel genuinely dangerous and Paradise City feel like it was about to fly apart. In 1990, he was fired for addiction. Remarkable hypocrisy, given the well-documented habits of everyone else in the band at that exact moment. Matt Sorum replaced him, technically superior by every measurable standard. The records that followed were bigger, slicker, and completely missing the coiled urgency that made Appetite one of the greatest rock albums ever recorded. Adler later said the firing broke something in him permanently. The band gained professionalism and lost everything that made their best music feel alive. In Peter Gabriel's case, there was no replacement good enough to even attempt.
Jacob, wake up, you got to tidy your room now.
This had made Peter Gabriel feel so unwelcome that leaving was the only rational response, and what left with him wasn't just a voice, it was an entire world. The costumes, the mythology, the theatrical strangeness that made Genesis unlike anything else in rock. Gone.
Sunday night, Mr. Farmer called, said, listen, son, you're wasting time.
Phil Collins stepped up, a great... Don Felder co-wrote Hotel California. Sit with that. The riff, the solo, the most recognizable guitar moment of the entire decade, Baby wrote it. Then in 2001, after years of bitter financial and creative warfare with Henley and Frey, he was fired from his own band, the one he'd been part of since 1974. He sued for wrongful termination. The case settled quietly. What Felder represented beyond that one famous riff was the harder, raw instinct that kept the Eagles from dissolving entirely into smooth, bloodless FM product. He was the grit in the machine. Once he was gone, the band became exactly as slick and toothless as their harshest critics had always claimed. They fired the man who gave them their defining moment and got a lawsuit as a receipt. Ace Frehley got something similar, minus the lawsuit, plus the makeup.
She's out there ready for us to play.
Kiss without Ace Frehley is a spectacle. Kiss with Ace Frehley was a rock band. That's the whole story, really. By 1982, substance abuse had made him chronically unreliable, and Simmons and Stanley finally ran out of patience. Understandable on its face, what they failed to account for was that Ace's sloppy, slightly unhinged playing was doing something irreplaceable, making Kiss feel genuinely dangerous rather than staged.
10,000 volts, feel like I was in space. She hit me.
Vinnie Vincent replaced him, technically superior by a wide margin and completely soulless in every way that actually mattered to the audience. Post-Ace records sold, the arenas stayed full, but the reckless electricity that made Shock Me and Rocket Ride feel like they might fall apart at any second was simply gone. Ace cycled back in later, but the original chemistry had an expiry date. Ian Gillan's chemistry was still at its absolute peak, then it disappeared in 12 months.
I'm not expecting people anymore.
Consider the timeline. 1972, Deep Purple record machine, Head. Arguably the greatest hard rock album ever made. 1973, Ian Gillan is gone. 1 year. Burnout, relentless touring, tensions that had become completely unbearable. And the voice. Behind Smoke on the Water, the primal scream on Child in Time, the raw ferocity that made Deep Purple genuinely dangerous, walked out the door.
Rockin' to the east and west, hard-headed woman and a soft-hearted man, caused the trouble since it all began.
David Coverdale replaced him, so a solid singer who went on to build a real career with Whitesnake. But the Mark II lineup was a specific, unrepeatable chemistry. Gillan's wildness of the set against Blackmore's precision, the tension between them powering the whole engine. Gillan eventually returned, and Reunion Records proved the spark was still alive beneath the surface. But that original window, Machine Head, Fireball, that specific era, closed in 12 months and never fully reopened.
I'm a blind man. I'm a blind man.
Brian Wilson's window closed far more slowly and far more sadly. This one isn't really a firing. It's something harder to name. Brian Wilson, the man who wrote Pet Sounds, conceived Good Vibrations, and fundamentally changed what pop music was allowed to be, wasn't pushed out in a meeting or cut with a phone call. He was gradually eroded, sidelined as his mental health collapsed through the 1970s and beyond, while the band he built kept touring relentlessly on songs he'd written in another life.
People out there hurting, and it really scares me.
By the time he was removed from band involvement, following a 2024 conservatorship ruling, the erosion had been happening for decades. No other story on this list carries this weight. The others were fired for greed, ego, impatience, stupidity, human failures with clear causes. Wilson was lost to illness, and those closest to him weren't always willing to protect him the way he deserved. The band kept singing his songs long after he could. That's a tragedy. Every band on this list had a reason. Addiction, ego, money, exhaustion, all real problems that end real relationships. And the band survived, and the records keep selling. But that spark doesn't transfer. It doesn't get replaced. It just disappears. Drop a comment. Who's the most unforgivable firing in rock history?
Sunday night, Mr. Farmer called, said, listen, son.
10,000 volts, feel like I was in space. Rockin' to the east and